They're getting travel allowance if it's overseas, that kind of stuff. So that can be misleading. But the military, basically, officers, kind of non-coms, and then, you know, enlisted folks down at the bottom. Now, you may get it general every so often over here. But that's fairly rare to get people that big income. Interesting, the military is much less unequal than the general society is. Yeah.
For the military, I know that some of the military branches give like a bonus for signing on. Mm-hmm. Like I know the Navy gives a $90K bonus for signing on after you complete your boot camp school and you go to A school or whatever. How does that factor into income?
Well, if they actually get an economic bonus, that's a windfall, and that would be taxed for that 1 year. And that's the disadvantage of a payment like that. It comes in for 1 year, they get a $90,000 income plus their normal income. Let's say the normal income is like $20,000 from working with the military. Now it's $110,000, it'll be taxed at that level. 1 year, and then the next year back to $20,000. Yeah.
In places like Seattle where minimum wage is $15 an hour, I was told that like, local mom and pop shops have to either close down because they can't continue to pay their employees or they have to move. So even though it sounds really nice about it being $15 an hour, wouldn't that just increase like economic inequality? Because then if mom and pop shops have to leave, then it's just going to leave places like Walmart.
That's the classic argument against increasing the minimum wage. I say, yeah, some people will benefit from increasing that minimum wage, but you'll lose jobs as employers hire fewer people because it's simply more costly for them to do so. That is a debate in economics. Now, the logic of that is clear, as you just described it. The question is whether there is the empirical evidence to support that proposition or not. Because just because something's logical doesn't make it true. There's a lot of logical stuff. People should save money for retirement because that's logical. Do they? No, they don't. I mean, it's like, whoa, I want a bigger TV today. They don't save, even though it's logical for them to do so. So then we have to look at the evidence. Here, the evidence is pretty clear from most studies of economics. Increasing the minimum wage, at least where it's most commonly done, up to about, and the dividing line is about $13. At that point, we do not see any major loss of jobs. Now, $14, $15, you're probably going to start getting a loss of jobs as a result of that. How much? And is that now the cost greater than the benefit of giving more money to the people who are making it? That's a harder question to answer. So the simple answer is it depends on how much you raise the minimum wage and how much you're going to get a loss of jobs. Not dramatically, as long as you don't go about $13 an hour. So the minimum wage being proposed for San Diego, which will be up for a vote, probably will not cause any kind of major loss of jobs.
Which will go to how much? 12 to 13?
About 12, 13, but it's graduated over a period of time. And in the meantime, we do have a little bit of inflation, and so that cost of $13, if it's instituted, 3-4 years from now, will not be the $13 it is right now. It'll be something like $12.50 or something like that. So that doesn't seem to cause much loss. Now you talk $15 an hour. That is an arguable point. But the data is inconclusive on that one. There is some evidence of loss of occupations, but then you've got to factor in is, okay, but there are also people getting more money as a result of that. Are those people better off to compensate for the few number of people who are losing jobs? Be aware that not all of these minimum wage workers are working for small mom and pop operations. Some may be working for large hotels in downtown San Diego, and therefore the loss is not coming from jobs. You can get it from their profit margins. They'll just have less profit. We already know in the United States right now, we had a historic level in terms of wages versus profit, in terms of the economy. That's that whole conversation about economic inequality. That is, more money is going to the profits of these large corporations than at any time since before the Great Depression. So because the profit margins are so large at this point, you increase the minimum wage, it's not necessarily going to lose jobs, they may lose profit. They'll have to reach into their own profit pocket and lose. So it's a complicated issue. It's not a simple black or white issue.
So is that the opposing view? Is it these operations are just going to lose profit?
Yeah. Yes, they could lose profit at that point.
Would any of them would most of them not just raise their cost or their income level by raising costs of items?
And that's the third alternative, is to raise the price of the product they sell. We know, for example, there was a study done of Danish fast food workers that have, Denmark, it's like 70-80% unionized. There, the average wage of a Danish fast food worker is about $17-18 an hour. Now, was there been a massive loss of jobs as a result of that? No, there have been some. The price of a Whopper has gone up, I think, by $1 as a consequence. The same Whopper produced, because it's a chain, same Whopper produced in Denmark is $1 more expensive than it is in this country. Is that horrible? Well, it's more expensive. But are those minimum wage workers making much more money and leading a much more working class lifestyle than our minimum wage workers? Yeah. Yeah, I need to move on this stuff. I'll take one more question, then I got to move on, because Tyler, you have a chance.
Well, wouldn't raising the minimum wage want companies to move out of the country because of profit losses?
Depending on the kind of company you're talking about, most are already doing that anyway if they can do so. Manufacturing, for example, we know they're already in China. The thing about service workers is where we have the greatest use of this low-wage work. What, they're going to ship hamburger flippers to China? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. You can't do that. Service work, you can't ship to China. Now what you can do is bring in the Chinese, and that's the whole question of immigration. So, but that's the only thing you can do with service work, because by its very definition, you can't ship somebody cleaning your house, making the bed to China. So, no, not necessarily. Depends on whether it is something that can be produced abroad. Okay, but I need to move on. Okay, what this does is to produce a chaotic family structure amongst these low-class people. The majority of children in poor communities, 2 out of every 3 children are being raised by single moms. Is this a disadvantage for these kids? Yes, it is. We know that intact family structure is an advantage to children, particularly because a male present in the household brings in more money. And especially for boys, that male present acts as a role model. Boys in these low-income communities, where are they getting their images of masculinity? Gangs, guys on the streets, first-person shooter games, movies. Not good. This generates a lack of self-confidence. It's the opposite of the cycle of advantage here. This is a cycle of disadvantage. Are they developing the work habits necessary to show up on time? No. Are a lot of the males, particularly in this kind of environment, being raised to be particularly physically aggressive? Not take your fucking talking, you fuck ass. You know, that kind of stuff. You know, that defense of ego says a lack of self-confidence, this hyper-aggressiveness. Is that a disadvantage, social-psychologically? Sure is. These people tend to be politically liberal. Ironically, these are the people affected most by immigration. White boys, working class guys all pissed off voting for Donald Trump because they'll keep our jobs here. The people who are really the problem for these working class jobs are not the immigrants coming across the border. It's the rich white boys shipping the jobs to China. So they are scapegoating. But the folks in the lower classes, ironically, they're the ones least concerned about immigration, though they are the ones most affected by it. We know the data in terms of the impact of immigration. It's fairly positive overall. Even illegal immigration is fairly positive overall for the economy, because you're bringing in hardworking people who are willing to work these minimum wage jobs. Does that help this middle class family to have this nice lady come in and clean the house for them? Yeah. On the other hand, does that depress the wages of people at the bottom? Yeah, a little bit. According to the best estimates, about 8% wage decline amongst low-income people here in this class as a result of immigration. But it's not horrible. But ironically, these are the people least concerned about that. But they never vote. No, they never. Very seldom do they vote. Questions about the lower class? This leads us to a conversation about poverty. I keep talking about this poverty line. What is it? How do we define it? There are two basic ways of defining poverty. One called absolute and the other called relative. An absolute definition of poverty is based upon some physical standard, usually food. I mean, you can take a very extreme example. Let's say you don't have enough protein in the diet. That child growing up in that environment is going to suffer with something called kwashiorkor or marasmus. These are the protein deficiencies of little children. Ever see those little kids in the third world country where there's starvation going on? Here's this little, 4-year-old kid, a swollen little belly. You can see the bones in its arm. That kid is suffering from what's called kwashiorkor, a lack of protein. That is going to stunt his physical development for the rest of his life. He's on the verge of dying because he doesn't have enough food. That will also probably stunt his mental development for the rest of his life. Now that's an extreme example, what's called an absolute definition of poverty. But you can take a less extreme one and just say, here's a minimally adequate diet. You need enough fruits, vegetables, and that kind of stuff. And without that, you're not going to be as healthy as you would otherwise. The U.S. poverty line is precisely based upon a food budget like I just described, a minimally adequate food budget. It was created in the 1960s, during a time in which our knowledge of nutrition was not as extensive as it is now. You had to have a certain amount of protein, a amount of fresh fruits and vegetables so you didn't get scurvy or rickets. What they did not recognize in the 1960s was that if you get a majority of your calories from things like pasta, carbohydrates, that this will increase the risk of what? Obesity. Today, are our low-class people much more obese than our upper-class people? Yes. Where are they getting their calories? From cheap junk food. They're getting it from potato chips. They're getting it from fried French fries. They're getting it from that fast food because those calories are cheapest. Our minimally adequate diet is the basis of the poverty line in the United States. This is from a couple of years ago. But for a family of 3, it's now about $21,000. Family of 3. If you make below about $21,000 a year and a family of 3, and what kind of family is that? That's a typical poor family. That's 1 mom and 2 kids. That's your standard poor family in the United States. 1 mom, 2 kids. You make below about $21,000 a year. That's from 2012, so it's gone up a little bit. You are poor. That's based on an absolute definition of poverty, a minimally adequate diet. Started in the 1960s. I can go into the specifics of it. I don't want to take the time. But take my word for it, it's based upon the price of food. The second way of measuring poverty is what's called a relative. And that's simply, there's no physical consequences. It's not based on food. There's nothing physical at all. It's just that you're outside the social mainstream. It's kind of like everybody else has cars, but you're taking public transportation. Now, there's no physical cost from that whatsoever. But on the other hand, do people look down on you as a